It started with a crash that echoed through the night like thunder splitting the sky. A police dog burst through the emergency room doors, his powerful jaws clamped gently around the jacket of an unconscious little girl. Blood streaked across his golden fur. His eyes burned with desperation no human could ignore. Nurses screamed. Doctors froze. Security guards reached for their weapons until they saw the badge glinting on his collar. He had no handler, no backup. No one knew where he had come from or how he had found her. The little girl's lips were turning blue. Her pulse was fading, and the dog refused to leave her side. But what no one understood yet was that this wasn't a rescue. This was a warning, because somewhere out there, in the darkness beyond those hospital walls, the person who hurt her was still hunting. And the dog knew exactly who it was. What happened next would shake an entire city to its core. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The autumn wind carried the scent of rain through the streets of Ridgemont as Officer Daniel Torres finished his evening patrol. The city was quiet tonight, the kind of stillness that settles over a place when most honest people are safe in their homes and only shadows move along empty sidewalks. Beside him trotted Atlas, a 4-year-old German shepherd whose reputation preceded him in every precinct across the county. His coat was a striking blend of black and tan, his eyes the color of warm amber, and his presence commanded respect from criminals and colleagues alike. Daniel had been Atlas's handler for 3 years now. 3 years of early mornings, late nights, countless searches, and more close calls than he cared to count. But through it all, one thing remained constant. Atlas never failed him. They had met at the K9 training academy when Atlas was barely more than a pup with oversized paws and an intensity in his gaze that made seasoned trainers stop and stare. He had been deemed too aggressive by his previous handler, too stubborn, too independent. Words that meant nothing to Daniel because he saw something else entirely. He saw loyalty waiting to be earned. It took 6 months before Atlas would follow a command without hesitation. 6 months of patience, of trust building, of proving to this magnificent animal that not every human hand brought pain. And when that bond finally formed, it was unbreakable. They pulled into the precinct parking lot just as the first drops of rain began to fall. Daniel scratched behind Atlas's ears as they walked toward the building. The dog's tail gave a slow, contented wag. "Good patrol tonight, buddy," Daniel murmured, nice and quiet. But Atlas paused at the door, his head turning sharply toward the tree line at the edge of the lot. His ears pricked forward. His body went rigid. Daniel frowned. "What is it, boy?" For a long moment, Atlas simply stared into the darkness. Then just as quickly as the tension had appeared, it vanished. The dog shook himself and pushed through the door like nothing had happened. Daniel followed. But he couldn't shake the feeling that had crawled up his spine. Atlas didn't react to nothing. His instincts were too sharp, too finely tuned for false alarms. Something was out there. He just didn't know what yet. The precinct buzzed with a low hum of activity. Officers typed reports, phones rang in the distance, and the coffee machine gurgled its familiar complaint. Daniel led Atlas to their shared space near the back of the building where the K9 unit kept their quarters. Captain Rivera approached with a clipboard, her expression tired but warm. "Torres, good timing. We got a community event tomorrow at Riverside Elementary. They requested you and Atlas specifically." Daniel smiled. "The kids love him." Rivera nodded. "Just try to keep him from knocking any of them over this time. No promises." As Daniel settled into his paperwork, Atlas curled up on his bed near the desk, but his eyes remained open, watching, listening. Every footstep that passed their door made his ears twitch. Every unfamiliar voice drew a low rumble from his chest. Daniel had learned long ago that Atlas was never truly at rest. His body might relax, but his mind stayed alert. It was the mark of a true protector, a guardian who never stopped guarding. The night deepened around them. Rain drummed against the windows in steady rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded, and in the shadows of Ridgemont, something terrible was already in motion. Daniel didn't know that across town, in a small house on Maple Street, A little girl named Sophie was being tucked into bed by a woman who was not her mother. He didn't know that Sophie's real mother was lying in a hospital bed 3 states away, unconscious from injuries no one could explain. And he certainly didn't know that in exactly 4 hours, Atlas would make a decision that would change everything. Because some heroes don't wait for orders. They follow their hearts. The call came at 3:17 in the morning. Daniel was deep in dreamless sleep when his phone shattered the silence. He grabbed it with practiced speed, already swinging his legs off the bed. Torres. The dispatcher's voice was clipped, urgent. We have a situation at Ridgemont General. K9 unit requested immediately. Something about a dog. Daniel was already pulling on his boots. A dog? A police dog, sir. German Shepherd. He came in carrying an injured child. No handler present. No one knows where he came from. Daniel's blood ran cold. He turned toward Atlas's bed in the corner of his bedroom. It was empty. The leash hung undisturbed on its hook. The door to the backyard stood slightly ajar, rain dripping through the gap. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs as he grabbed his keys and sprinted toward his truck. His mind raced through impossible calculations. Atlas had never run off before. Never. Not once in 3 years. But deep in his gut, a voice whispered the truth he couldn't yet accept. Atlas hadn't run off. He had run toward something. The hospital parking lot was chaos when Daniel arrived. Patrol cars clustered near the emergency entrance, their lights painting the wet asphalt in strobing red and blue. Officers stood in clusters, speaking in low, urgent tones. Daniel pushed through the crowd, his badge clearing a path. The automatic doors whooshed open, and the antiseptic smell of the ER hit him like a wall. And there, in the center of the trauma bay, surrounded by nurses and doctors, lay a little girl with golden hair matted with blood. Atlas sat beside her gurney, his body pressed against the metal frame. His fur was soaked. His eyes never left her face. And when anyone tried to approach, a low growl rumbled from his chest like distant thunder. One of the doctors spotted Daniel and rushed over. Thank God. Is this your dog? Daniel nodded slowly, his throat tight. That's Atlas. He's my partner. We can't get near the girl. He won't let anyone touch her except the nurses he's deemed safe. It's like he's deciding who can help. Daniel moved closer, his voice soft but commanding. Atlas. Easy, boy. It's me. The dog's head turned. Those amber eyes, usually so fierce, held something Daniel had never seen before. Fear. What happened to you, buddy? Daniel whispered, kneeling beside him. Where did you find her? Atlas whined softly and pressed his nose against the little girl's hand. Her fingers twitched, and the dog's tail gave a single, hopeful wag. One of the nurses approached cautiously. She's stable now, but barely. Multiple lacerations, signs of dehydration, and bruising consistent with restraint. Whoever did this to her wanted to keep her hidden. Daniel's jaw tightened. Do we have an ID? Not yet. No missing child reports match her description. It's like she doesn't exist. But Atlas knew she existed. Atlas had found her when no one else could. And as Daniel looked into his partner's eyes, he understood something that defied all logic. This dog hadn't stumbled upon a lost child. He had rescued her from something far worse. The hours that followed moved in fragments of tension and confusion. Detectives arrived, social workers appeared. The hospital became a command center as officers scrambled to piece together the impossible puzzle Atlas had dropped in their laps. Daniel refused to leave. He sat in a plastic chair near the girl's room, Atlas pressed against his legs, both of them watching the door like sentinels. Captain Rivera arrived just after dawn, her face drawn with exhaustion and concern. Torres. Walk me through this. Daniel shook his head slowly. I wish I could, Captain. I was asleep. Atlas was in his bed, and then he was just gone. Next thing I know, dispatch is calling about a German Shepherd carrying an unconscious child into the ER. Rivera studied the dog, her expression unreadable. How far is your place from here? 12 miles, through residential areas, 2 major intersections, and a stretch of highway. And he did all that in the middle of the night, in the rain, carrying a child. Daniel looked down at his partner. I've seen him do incredible things, but this, he paused, his voice catching. This is something else. Atlas lifted his head, meeting Rivera's gaze with an intensity that made even the seasoned captain take a step back. He knows something, she murmured. Something he can't tell us. Daniel nodded. And I think whoever hurt that girl is still out there. Rivera's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression darkened. We just got the lab results on the girl's clothing. There were traces of an industrial solvent used in print shops. Same compound was found at a suspected trafficking site we raided last month. Daniel's stomach dropped. Trafficking. We shut down the operation, but the leaders escaped. We've been hunting them ever since. Rivera's voice lowered. If Atlas found her at their new location, that means they've set up somewhere in our city, and they know we're looking. The weight of her words settled over them like a shroud. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a manhunt, and the only witness who could lead them to the monsters responsible was a 4-year-old German shepherd who had already crossed impossible distances to save a life. Daniel placed his hand on Atlas's head, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. You found her once, buddy, he whispered. Can you find them too? Atlas's ears pricked forward. His body tensed, and in that moment, Daniel saw the answer burning in those amber eyes. Yes, he could. The little girl woke just after noon. Her eyes fluttered open, pale blue and filled with terror that made Daniel's heart crack. Atlas was on his feet instantly, pressing his nose against her small hand. The gesture was so gentle, so protective, that even the hardened officers watching from the doorway went silent. A child psychologist had been called in, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Ellen Park, who specialized in trauma cases. She approached the bed slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Hi, sweetheart. My name is Ellen. You're safe now. Can you tell me your name? The girl's lips trembled. She looked at Atlas, then at Daniel, then back at the dog. Her small fingers curled around Atlas's ear. Sophie, she breathed. My name is Sophie. That's a beautiful name. Ellen said gently. Sophie, do you remember what happened to you? Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head violently, her whole body beginning to tremble. Atlas whined softly and rested his head on the edge of her bed. The contact seemed to calm her. Her breathing slowed. Her grip on his ear loosened. The dog, she whispered. The dog saved me. Daniel leaned forward. Sophie, can you tell us where you were before the dog found you? Sophie's face crumpled. A dark place. They kept us in a dark place. We weren't allowed to talk. If we talked, they hurt us. The room went deathly silent. Daniel's voice was steady despite the rage building in his chest. Us? There were other children? Sophie nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. My friend Emma. She's still there. She's still in the dark. Wait. There are more children still trapped in that dark place? If your heart just dropped like mine did, hit that like button right now. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now because what Atlas does next is absolutely incredible. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think they'll find Emma in time? Daniel was on his feet before he realized he was moving. Captain, he turned to Rivera, who had gone pale. There are more. Rivera was already reaching for her radio. All units, this is now a priority 1 situation. We have confirmation of multiple victims. I want every available officer on standby. She looked at Daniel, her eyes hard. Can he do it? Can Atlas track the location? Daniel looked down at his partner. Atlas was already standing, his body rigid with purpose, his nose working the air. He already knows, Daniel said quietly. He's been waiting for us to ask. They moved with precision and urgency. Daniel loaded Atlas into the K-9 vehicle while a convoy formed behind them. Patrol cars, unmarked sedans, and a SWAT van assembled in the hospital parking lot. Rivera approached Daniel's window. The psychologist says Sophie described an old building. Concrete walls, the smell of chemicals, and the sound of trains. The industrial district, Daniel said immediately, near the old freight yards. That's a lot of ground to cover. Daniel looked at Atlas, who sat in the back seat with his nose pressed to the window, every muscle in his body coiled with readiness. Not for him. They drove in tense silence through the rain-washed streets of Ridgemont. The city looked different now, its familiar landmarks shadowed by the knowledge of what lurked in its forgotten corners. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. His mind kept returning to Sophie's words. She's still there. She's still in the dark. How many children had been taken? How long had they been suffering while the world went on around them? Oblivious? And how had Atlas known? The dog had never shown any interest in that direction during their patrols. There was no logical reason for him to have traveled 12 miles through the night to a location he'd never seen. Unless he had sensed something that transcended logic. Something primal. Something that only a creature unburdened by doubt could follow. They reached the industrial district just as the afternoon sun began to break through the clouds. Abandoned warehouses lined the streets, their broken windows staring like hollow eyes. Rusted train tracks cut through the overgrown lots. The air smelled of decay and neglect. Daniel opened the back door, and Atlas leaped out with focused intensity. His nose immediately went to the ground, sweeping left and right, processing thousands of scent particles no human could detect. "Find them, Atlas," Daniel commanded softly. "Find the children." Atlas's head snapped up. His ears rotated. His body went rigid. And then he ran. Daniel sprinted after him, radio crackling with updates as the convoy followed at a distance. Atlas moved like a force of nature, weaving between rusted shipping containers and piles of debris, never hesitating, never doubting. He stopped at a massive warehouse at the far end of the district. Its walls were covered in graffiti, its loading dock doors sealed with heavy chains. Atlas sat down and stared at the building. "This is it," Daniel said into his radio. "North Warehouse. Request immediate backup." The next few minutes were a blur of coordinated chaos. SWAT took positions. Officers secured the perimeter. Daniel crouched beside Atlas, his hand on the dog's shoulder. "You did it, buddy," he whispered. "Now let us finish it." But Atlas wasn't done. Without warning, the dog lunged toward a side entrance, his powerful jaws clamping down on the rusted handle. With a violent wrench, he tore the door from its hinges. "Atlas, wait!" But the dog was already inside. The interior of the warehouse was a labyrinth of shadows and stale air. Daniel followed Atlas through the darkness, his flashlight cutting weak beams through the dust. The smell hit him first. Industrial chemicals mixed with something else. Something human. Atlas stopped at a heavy metal door bolted from the outside. He scratched at it frantically, his whines echoing off the concrete walls. Daniel's heart was pounding as he reached for the bolt. Behind him, footsteps approached as other officers caught up. The bolt slid free with a grinding screech. The door swung open, and what they found inside would haunt Daniel for the rest of his life. 12 children huddled in the corner of a makeshift cell, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5. They flinched away from the flashlight beams, conditioned to fear any source of light. But one girl stepped forward. Her dark hair was matted, her dress torn, but her eyes held a spark of defiance that hadn't been extinguished. She looked at Atlas. "You came back," she breathed. "You came back for us." Daniel felt tears burning in his eyes as he watched his partner walk slowly toward the children. Atlas lowered himself to the ground, making himself as small and unthreatening as possible. His tail gave a gentle wag. One by one, the children approached. Small hands reached out to touch his fur. Whispered voices called him good boy and hero and friend. And Atlas accepted every touch, every word, every tear that fell onto his coat, with the patience of a saint. I don't know about you, but I'm in tears right now. 12 children saved because one dog refused to give up. If Atlas just became your hero, smash that share button and send this to everyone you know. This is what real loyalty looks like. But we're not done yet. The person who did this is still out there. The arrest came swiftly. 3 suspects were apprehended at the scene, caught trying to flee through a back exit. Their faces were blank, emotionless, the faces of people who had long ago abandoned their humanity. But there was one face missing, the leader. Sophie had described a woman with cold eyes and a voice like honey, a woman who called herself Mama Rose and who controlled everything from a distance. They searched every inch of the warehouse. They interrogated the arrested suspects. They combed through digital records and traced phone signals. Nothing. Mama Rose had vanished like smoke. Captain Rivera stood in the warehouse loading dock as the last of the children were loaded into ambulances. Her expression was a mixture of triumph and frustration. "We saved them," she said quietly. "But the person responsible is still out there." Daniel watched Atlas pace near the entrance, his nose working overtime. The dog was agitated, unsettled, as if he knew the job wasn't finished. "He'll find her," Daniel said. "He found the children. He'll find her too. But how? We have no leads, no trail, nothing." Daniel looked at his partner. Atlas had stopped pacing and was now staring intently at one of the arrested suspects being loaded into a patrol car. The man's face was bruised from the takedown, but he wore a smirk that made Daniel's blood boil. "He knows something," Daniel murmured. Rivera followed his gaze. "Then let's find out what." The interrogation room was small and cold. The suspect sat with his hands cuffed to the table, his smirk never fading even as Rivera and Daniel took their seats across from him. "You're in a lot of trouble," Rivera said flatly. "Trafficking, kidnapping, conspiracy. You're looking at multiple life sentences." The man shrugged. "I want a lawyer. You'll get one. But first, I want to know where Mama Rose is." The smirk widened. "Who?" Rivera slammed her palm on the table. "Don't play games with me. Where is she?" The man leaned back, his eyes cold. "You'll never find her. She's too smart, too careful. By now, she's already in another country with new papers and a new name. You caught the little fish. The whale is long gone." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked out without a word. In the hallway, he found Atlas waiting, as always. The dog's eyes followed his every movement, reading his frustration like words on a page. "She got away," Daniel muttered. He crouched down, burying his face in Atlas's fur. "We saved the kids, but she got away." Atlas whined softly and licked his cheek, and then something strange happened. The dog suddenly pulled away and walked toward the station's front entrance. His body was tense again, his head high, his nostrils flaring. "Atlas!" The dog reached the glass doors and stared out into the night. His tail went rigid, a low growl built in his throat. Daniel approached slowly. "What do you see, buddy?" And then he saw her, a woman standing across the street, partially hidden in the shadows of a bus stop. Her hair was silver white, her posture was unnaturally still, and even from this distance, Daniel could see the cold calculation in her eyes. She was watching them. Atlas barked once, sharp and commanding. The woman smiled, and then she stepped into a black sedan that pulled away into the darkness, its license plates obscured by mud. Daniel's blood ran cold as he grabbed his radio. "All units. We have a possible sighting of Mama Rose. Black sedan heading east on 5th Avenue. I need every available car on pursuit." The next 10 minutes were chaos. Police cruisers flooded the streets, their sirens cutting through the night air. Helicopters joined the search, their spotlights sweeping across rooftops and alleyways. But the sedan had vanished. Daniel sat in his cruiser, Atlas beside him, both of them breathing hard from the chase. The radio crackled with frustrated updates. "Lost visual. No sign of the vehicle. Suspect has escaped the perimeter." Rivera's voice came through, heavy with disappointment. "Stand down. She's gone." Daniel slammed his fist against the steering wheel. He wanted to scream, to rage, to tear the city apart until he found her. But Atlas placed his paw on Daniel's arm. The gesture was so deliberate, so human, that Daniel's anger faltered. He looked into those amber eyes and saw something unexpected. Patience. Atlas wasn't defeated. He was waiting because he knew something Daniel didn't. He knew that the hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. 3 days passed. The rescued children were reunited with their families in tearful scenes that made even the most hardened officers weep. Sophie's mother had been located in a hospital in Ohio, recovering from an assault that had been staged to look like an accident. The traffickers had taken Sophie while her mother lay unconscious, never knowing her daughter had been stolen. Their reunion was the single most beautiful moment Daniel had ever witnessed. Sophie ran across the hospital room and leapt into her mother's arms, both of them sobbing, holding each other like they would never let go. And through it all, Atlas watched from the doorway, his tail wagging gently, his eyes soft with something that looked remarkably like satisfaction. But Daniel couldn't fully celebrate. Mama Rose was still free. Every night he studied the case files. Every morning he walked Atlas through the streets, hoping the dog would catch a scent, a trail, anything that would lead them to the monster who had orchestrated so much suffering. And every night Atlas would stand at the window of Daniel's apartment, staring out into the darkness as if waiting for something. On the fourth night, it came. Daniel was jolted awake by Atlas's barking, not the playful bark of morning energy or the warning bark of a stranger at the door. This was the bark of pursuit, the bark of certainty. Daniel grabbed his weapon and followed Atlas to the front door. The dog was scratching at it frantically, his whole body vibrating with urgency. Daniel opened the door. A manila envelope sat on his doorstep. No return address, no postmark, just a single name written in elegant script, Officer Torres. Daniel picked it up with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph and a note. The photograph showed a woman's face, pale and lifeless, lying in what appeared to be a morgue. The features were unmistakable. Mama Rose. The note read simply, "You may have won this battle, but the war continues without me. Others will rise. Others will take my place. The children you saved will never be truly safe. Sweet dreams, officer, and give my regards to the dog." Daniel's blood ran cold. He looked at Atlas, who was staring at the photograph with an intensity that defied explanation. "She's dead," Daniel whispered. "Someone killed her before we could catch her. But who? And why? And what did the note mean about others rising?" The questions multiplied faster than answers could form. Daniel spent the next week working with federal agencies, tracing the photograph, analyzing the note, trying to understand the sprawling network that Mama Rose had left behind. What they discovered was terrifying. Mama Rose was just one head of a hydra, a vast criminal enterprise that spanned multiple states and dozens of operatives. Her death had been ordered by her own organization when she became too exposed, too recognizable, too much of a liability. But the organization itself remained intact, and they were already recruiting new leaders. The investigation expanded, task forces were formed, undercover operations were launched in multiple cities. But for Daniel and Atlas, the mission had become personal. Every child they had saved carried a piece of their hearts now. Every face they had seen in that dark cell haunted their dreams. And every day that passed without justice was a day the monsters grew stronger. Atlas never wavered. Every patrol, every search, every call that came in, he was ready. His body aged, his muzzle slowly graying, but his spirit remained unbroken. And Daniel? Daniel had found his purpose, not just as a handler, not just as an officer, but as a protector, a guardian, a voice for those who had been silenced. Years later, the organization would be dismantled. Hundreds of arrests would be made across the country. Thousands of children would be saved. But it all started here, in a hospital room on a rainy night, with a dog who refused to wait for permission to be a hero. Daniel stood at the window of his apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and amber. Atlas lay on his bed nearby, older now, slower, but still watching. Always watching. 12 years, Daniel murmured. 12 years since that night. Atlas's tail gave a weak wag at the sound of his voice. Daniel crossed the room and knelt beside his partner. The dog's muzzle was almost entirely gray now. His eyes still held that familiar fire, but it burned lower, gentler. "You know what, buddy?" Daniel said softly. "I used to think heroes were people who did impossible things. People who flew or had super strength or could see through walls." He placed his hand on Atlas's head, feeling the warmth of his fur, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "But you taught me something different. You taught me that heroes are the ones who show up, the ones who don't quit, the ones who walk into the darkness because someone needs to." Atlas closed his eyes and leaned into Daniel's touch. "You didn't wait for orders that night. You didn't calculate the odds or weigh the risks. You just knew a child was in danger, and you moved heaven and earth to save her." A tear slid down Daniel's cheek. "You're the best partner I ever had, the best friend I ever had, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to live up to the example you set." Atlas opened his eyes and looked at Daniel with an expression of perfect understanding. His tail wagged once more. And in that moment, in that quiet room filled with golden light, two souls who had walked through darkness together finally found their peace. Because sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they have four paws and a heart that could move mountains. And sometimes, in the moments that matter most, they teach us what it truly means to love. If this story touched your heart, please hit like, share it with someone who needs to believe in heroes, and subscribe for more true emotional stories. And remember, real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's a German shepherd running 12 miles through the rain, carrying a child he'd never met, because somewhere deep in his soul, he knew she needed him. That's not training, that's love. And that's the kind of hero the world will always need.